Hello, thank you for joining us. We are just waiting for everyone to log in. If you could please put your name, your district, and your role in the district, we would appreciate it. Hello, and thank you for coming. We are just waiting for everyone to log on. If you could just put your name, your district, and the role in your district in the chat, we would appreciate it. Thank you for coming today. So good afternoon. Thank you for coming. We're still waiting for about 20 more people to join on. Hopefully they'll make it today. Please put your name and your district and your role in the district in the chat. And thank you for coming today. I'm going to give it another minute to see if we can get more people logged on. But welcome to Esports Beyond the Game, our panel discussion today on wellness. Hello and welcome. If you're just arriving, please put your name, the district, and your role in the chat. Just going to give it one more minute and then we're going to get started. We'll start at 2:35. So welcome everyone. Thank you for attending today's webinar, Esports Beyond the Game panel discussion on wellness. Thank you for adding your name, your district, and your role into the chat. My name is Patricia Gramillion-Burge, and I am the Assistant Administrative Coordinator for Curriculum and Assessment at Eastern Suffolk BOCES on Long Island, and I support districts with esports at our BOCES. This panel series today is the result of a collaboration between New York State stakeholders in esports, specifically Erie One BOCES, Genesee Valley BOCES, NYRIC, and LYRIC. Before we get started today, I'd like to invite you to attend our last panel discussion on May 24th, which will be on inclusion. We will put the registration link in the chat in a few minutes, but that will be the last of our series for this year. So today is the fourth of 5 panel discussions addressing esports and careers in esports. Today's topic is about wellness, not only careers in wellness, but how we can support our esports athletes in regard to their whole wellness. So how can they play at peak performance while maintaining a healthy, active lifestyle? So anybody who's just joining us, thank you. Please put your name and your district and your role in the chat. So we were going to talk about a multi-dimensional approach to supporting student athlete wellness, which includes social, emotional, spiritual, intellectual, physical, financial, occupational, and environmental wellness. If you're not familiar with webinar, you're used to just being on a regular Zoom meeting, we cannot see you. So you can eat if you want, put your dog on your lap, etc. We can't see you, but we do want you to participate. So please put your name in the chat. Please use the Q&A, and our moderators, my co-committee members, will answer some of your questions. So let's get started. What we'll do today is we'll have our panelists tell us their name, their role, and their position, and a little bit about themselves and how they got involved with esports. So let's start. I'm going to look at the panelists in front of me, and let's start with Hillary.
Hi there, everybody. I'm thrilled to be on this panel again. I was actually on the last one as well, about curriculum. And if anyone does have some questions about curriculum, I can help with those in terms of wellness. But my name is Hillary D, and I am Model Schools Coordinator at NARIC at Northeastern Regional Information Center, based out of Albany. We have been working with esports, connected with model schools for actually the past few years. NARIC has had a pretty active esports program. I was involved sort of on the fringes for a while, and then I became a lot more involved in the past year. I also, particularly after COVID, before COVID, but particularly after the closures of school, became very interested in digital wellness in general. Which prompted me to pursue the Digital Wellness Institute's certificate program. It's a 10-week program for research-based sort of tools on digital wellness. Esports was a part of that, so it fit nicely with what I was doing. So I think that's probably why I'm on this panel. And in addition to that, I have had, some of my own experiences and challenges to, real life experience with my own young gamers. So I am thrilled to be here, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Hillary. Chris Jensen, can you go next?
Sure. Hi, so my name is Chris Jensen. I am the social media mental health specialist at Rensselaer City School District. And the title sounds kind of vague or confusing, but basically, my goal has been to, as a prevention educator, going into classrooms and delivering a curriculum I've been working on with students about digital wellness and self-reflection and how to make sure that we're using our technology in a positive and a healthy way. My own personal experience with esports has been a lot personal. I have spent a lot of time when I was growing up playing at an amateur level competitively, being involved in broadcasting in different scenes and things like that. So it's definitely something that I've been really passionate about. And before I went to school for school counseling to get into the realm of schools, I was in the tech field. And like I said, I've been involved in, thought about careers in esports in a lot of different ways. So this role has been a great opportunity for me to pursue a couple of different passions at once. And, I think then for this panel, hopefully I have some valuable advice, both from the mental health and the school perspective, but also from my own perspective of being involved in those scenes.
Thank you very much, Chris. Dr. Melanie, would you like to go next?
Sure, thank you, Patricia. So I am Melanie Austin. I'm an associate professor at New York Tech and also a faculty associate with the Center for Esports Medicine. I've been working with the Center for Esports Medicine for several years now, and it's just been a great opportunity. My role consists of looking at the mental health, well-being, and healthy lifestyle behaviors of our esport athletes. We've been able to look at the research and work on developing new models. So Dr. Dwight Bell, who is the director of the Center for Esports Medicine, has been really working hard to look at integrated models of health for esport athletes. My role, has been, looking at mental health. I teach mental health and health promotion, but it's been an amazing opportunity for me because I am a former traditional athlete from New York Tech. And so making that transition to esports has just been exciting. And I'm really interested in looking at what's meaningful to esport athletes holistically, their well-being and their quality of life overall. So I'm really, really happy to be here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. You want to go last but not least, Dr. Chris Jensen.
Thank you so much. I'm the other Chris, very happy to be here as well. And my background is a little bit different from some of the other panelists. I proudly served as an emergency medicine physician for quite some time. And then also, believe it or not, taught at the high school level in terms of science. I now combined both of those passions into being a health advisor for school districts, as well as corporations and businesses that support schools. And I love that opportunity because it allows me to use both skill sets from a clinical perspective, as well as someone who is in the trenches in the classroom. My involvement with esports is mainly through curriculum, as well as a research project, looking at the potential embedded effects of SEL instruction with esports curriculum. It's a passion that I have simply because I realize that esports provides a niche and opportunity for a lot of students that maybe have not found their home in other extracurricular opportunities. And so we're looking at kind of the benefits and potential risks that esports may provide these individuals, and I find that all fascinating. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jensen. So right away, just listening from some of your experience, we have people who are interested in tech, social media. Some of you have some teaching experience, former athletes. Many of you have mentioned mental health, prevention education, digital wellness, all areas where our students can focus on and have a career, and also maybe have a career in esports as well. So I look forward to exploring that a little bit more. So I'd like to ask you all on our panel here is how do we take a holistic approach to supporting athletes and teams in esports? Who would like to get started with answering that question? So how do we take a holistic approach to supporting esports athletes and teams?
I can start if that's okay. Well, I think taking a holistic approach really means approaching the esport athlete from a person-centered perspective, looking holistically at the whole person and helping them to identify what their strengths and weaknesses are, in addition to what their interests are within esports, but also outside of esports. And so I kind of look at it as an occupational therapist as this occupational profile, looking at all contexts, their personal context, their environmental context, the physical, the social, emotional, and really looking at the whole person. And I think one key thing that stands out for me is how they spend their day. What are their daily routines? And is it satisfying to them? Is it healthy? Is it meaningful? And so that's the approach I usually would take in addressing the whole person.
Thank you. Do we have anybody else who wants to talk about that?
Can I jump in?
Of course, Hillary.
So I completely agree, and I was kind of going to say something along the same lines, and I think they sort of complement one another. So I was going to say sort of my stock answer, which would be just in terms of health, sleep, obviously, is really, really important. Mental health, which is huge. Physical activity, taking into account nutrition, things like that. And some of that is really personalized. So it's hard to just have this big blanket statement. When you think about like mental health, well, what's healthy for you, what's healthy for me? And we probably will talk about screen time a little bit and variation and things like that. But I think, really looking at what's meaningful to you, what sort of activities are helping you achieve your goals, what benefits you in terms of your passions and your interests and things like that. And some of these really interesting curriculums that are out there, just kind of touching on what we talked about last time, really delve into that with students, having them write reflections and having them really think about where it is they want to go in life and how the stuff that they're experiencing with the gaming on the team and individually sort of helps achieve those goals and helps them meet some of their personal interests.
Thank you, Hillary. Chris, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I can jump in too. I mean, I think, that word of structure too, of having some kind of structure is important, because whenever I think of a lot of, my friends who game or myself or the students that I'm seeing too, there's such a strong focus on, what you're doing in the game, what you're doing on the server, how well are you performing? Are you getting a lot of wins? Are you not so good? There's such a hyper focus on just everything that's only happening in the game. So I think a lot of students, they lose that fact of there is the whole person. There is success is going to be in the industry is going to be defined as way more than just like, are you able to perform well in the game or not? There's so much more, and that's why that holistic approach is so important. But I also think that the students need models of what that looks like, because they are learning a lot from, their peers, but also who are they watching on Twitch and who are they watching on YouTube and those streams. And because there is such a big focus on, oh, wow, they're so talented, they're so this, they're so that, I think the students end up missing all of the other things that go into making that person successful. And they need that help from the adults in their lives and schools as well, of like, what does that look like?
Thank you, Chris.
If I could jump in, I love what the other panelists said. There's a lot of wisdom in those comments. The only thing that I would add, and perhaps it's mirroring their sentiment, is, any activity, what are you investing or potentially giving up to do it? And what do you gain from it? And when I think holistically, it's how does that activity leverage or benefit other aspects of my life? And, what potential deficits does it have when I look at it? Take running. Running in moderation, when done properly, also supports diet, nutrition, and sleep. But when done excessively or incorrectly, can be self-harm, not only physically, but also mentally. And so I think we're dealing with a new novel thing, right? Esports is relatively new. And so there's hesitancy, there's myths, there's rumors, there's things that people wonder about. And perhaps that's why it's fascinating right now, is looking into, is it just games? Or is it a activity or segue to form relationships and develop new parts of yourself? And that's really, I think we're going to get to in this discussion in one way or another.
Thank you. So I like, again, saying what Chris said, is that we're looking at the whole athlete, the whole person. We're not just focusing on the gaming. And like Chris Jensen said, we're watching someone, a role model, and we're just like looking at their performance, which does make me think about traditional sports, traditional sports too. We look at how many, goals someone's had, how many touchdowns someone's had, et cetera. We look at those stats too. I feel that in traditional sports, there's a lot more support surrounding the athlete. So how do we take traditional sports and use some of those sports? Like there's an athletic trainer, right, for traditional sports, maybe not so much. And I'm new to this too, for an esports athlete. But what would we take from traditional sports and what would maybe we'd leave aside to support the esports athlete?
Well, as a former track and field athlete, it was just so important, the pre-competition the training, the relaxation as well, the mental strength, and also the support from the coaches and the teammates. All of that was just so important, because actually when we got to the race, it was like over in less than a minute. And then the post competition was also just important, whether it was the cool down and, you know, the kind of really getting back to the reality of everyday life. So I would say, you know, some of the aspects of traditional training and preparation are very important, but really the emphasis on mental health is just so very important. I had the opportunity to interview 2 of our eSport athletes from the CyBears here at New York Tech, and the responses I got was just amazing. And they really focused on the importance of mental health, balancing mental health with their education. And that really stood out for me a lot more so than traditional sports. And one of the things they talked about was really having the support from the academic institution in being able to manage the sport, the esport, and also their classes. And I remember being an athlete, that was the issue. You know, I had to be on the track for practice, but then again, you know, I had labs and I had classes, and they weren't going to change the curriculum for me. So I'm just so happy to be on this panel with you all, some who are developing curriculum and really thinking about it from that standpoint, because that's what really stood out with the eSport athletes that I spoke to.
Thank you. Anyone want to talk about this a little bit more?
Yeah, I could jump in for it as well. I mean, thinking about, you know, what a traditional athlete will go through, there's a lot of planful, mindful practice of, you know, I want to get faster, I need to jump higher, and this is, you know, your coach is going to help you, you know, work on that. Whereas it's a little bit of the Wild West when it comes to esports. I think there's a lot of focus on, you know, the grind of, well, you just got to keep playing, you got to go out there and you keep playing, you'll get better, but it's not planful. It's not, I need to improve in this aspect or that aspect. So you really have the students themselves just kind of guiding and just trying to figure it out, which makes it difficult unless you have that super you know, natural talent or ability to just, you know, be number one. So I mean, thinking about it from that perspective, and maybe the school is, there are probably not too many people that have all the different skills that you need to do that in an esports setting. So kind of bringing in, if you're talking career, bringing in your school counselor who's helping get kids set up for after high school, bringing in even your traditional coaches of how do you create a regimen for your athletes, and then bring in the techie people or the gamers, whether that's students or staff, and, you know, what do you think will be beneficial to learn? And I think it'll have to be just like a whole staff or whole community kind of thing, because I think right now you don't really have too many people that are just, oh yeah, I'm the expert in all of it. Like it's gonna take a village for a lot of that.
That's great. Thank you, Chris. Dr. Jensen, did you want to add anything?
I think it was well covered by our other panelists, and the only thing that I could think of that might fit in here is that we've actually learned a lot from traditional sports. You know, we've learned about the benefits of competition, the benefits of teammates, the downside of overtraining, the sometimes elevated pressure that exists in a child's life at too young of an age, you know, if their parents might have aspirations of D1 scholarships for them and so forth, you know. And I think that prior knowledge and experience really applies to esports. The thing about it is when you ask the general public or someone like myself who's not a gamer, I think the thing that immediately pops in their head is kids at home playing video games alone, right? And I think what's trying to happen as I learn more and more is there are a lot of wonderful people that are trying to create a unique opportunity and experience for kids to network, form relationships, and find their niche. And by niche, The same as maybe you have a niche in band, maybe you have a niche in baseball. You get the idea. This is another niche. There's a big difference between doing something in school with your peers where it's standardized, held to accountability, and has a uniform process versus doing something rogue on your own. And so I think we'll obviously dive into the subject a little bit more, but that's one of the things that I think about it, that esports almost has a unexpected advantage in that we've learned so many lessons from traditional sports. As we ramp this up, I hope we take advantage of those lessons we were taught and apply them to this new activity.
And it's interesting because as all of you are talking, I'm thinking about some of the pushback we've had from interscholastic sports about whether or not esports is actually a sport and aligning it, with other sports. But what you're saying here and what you're telling me is that we can use these planned mindful practice, this structure, looking at the whole child, using all of these resources, human capital that we have in our schools, in our community, to support the esport athlete, just like we would the traditional athlete. And part of the reason why we did these panels is we wanted to raise awareness and talk about how it's not just video gaming. This is a competition, and it is getting that niche, as Chris said, of students we might not have reached before. But many of you spoke about mental health, and Dr. Austin shared that she spoke to some of her athletes and they talked about how important mental health is. How do we support our athletes with their mental health and their self-esteem as we help them and assist them along this process?
Well, I would initially say approaching it from an empowerment perspective, approaching the student athlete by highlighting their strengths, finding out what their strengths are, first of all, and whether it's within esports and outside of esports. I would also say finding out what their awareness is of their own healthy lifestyle behaviors. Are they aware of what's healthy for them? How much sleep they should get, how to manage stress. Do they manage stress? Do they have someone to talk to, a support network or someone to call? So I really look at some of those things as well as how they're spending their time now. How did they deal with challenges in the past? And what might be some strategies that they, have used in the past? How can we help them to kind of change some of those? But really from an empowerment perspective, I think it's such a great opportunity, as everyone else said, for awareness and gaining greater insight for us as well as for the esport athlete. So I really think, yes, definitely looking at this from a strengths perspective and highlighting some of that.
Anyone else want to add on to what Dr. Austin's saying?
I can jump in. I was reading some of the chat comments, which I thought were terrific in terms of maybe not focusing so much, because some of the coaches aren't even gamers themselves necessarily, but working as a facilitator more in helping with sort of healthy choices and dealing with self-regulation and emotions and things like that, and sort of being a facilitator for that healthy lifestyle and helping students be aware of what their habits are, and if they're being intentional about their gaming, things like that. And what I mean by that is, it may be practice, but going home and practicing all night when you've also been on the computer for homework and maybe some social media and things like that. Well, holistically looking at the full person model, you've been on the computer now, all day, and maybe even playing with folks that you're not even close to, right? Like those distant connections that really aren't fueling your soul, like not your friends that you'd see at school. And then you're sort of, you have this very definitive amount of time in a day. And like Dr. Chris said, what are you giving up? What's the sacrifice there? Are you connected? Or you have positive relationships? Are you being productive? How are your grades? How are all those different pieces? How's your learning? Are you growing as a person? And then also that physical activity, because like when we're practicing football or other sports, we're inherently getting physical activity. That's part of it. But a video game is sitting in a chair for hours on end, and we have to be aware of how to kind of work in that physical activity, which connects with, I think, how we feel inside and how our nutrition decisions and everything sort of connects, because it can be really taxing to sit and play a video game, just for hours on end. I mean, I've seen it in my own house, and there's a stress level and emotional involvement. And I think coaches also, too, help manage some of those negative emotions, that toxic culture that we all hear about sometimes, and helping kids manage those rageful emotions. I talk about rage quitting, because it's a real thing, and just helping them sort of regulate themselves and do visualization exercises, breathing exercises, just different ways to cope with stress. And in those ways, coaches are very much more facilitators, I think, in some of those life skills.
I mean, that was incredible, Hillary, because as everybody was thinking, I'm a former health teacher myself, and I was thinking, well, we always say healthy. What exactly is healthy? I think Hillary just talked about it a little bit. Like, we talked about it's individualized, it's personalized. We have to get to know the person and see what their strengths are, and fueling your soul. I love that. But self-regulation, stress management, self-esteem, scrolling. All the time we spend on the screen, which part is scrolling, which part is playing, which part is school, because I think we say, oh, that's not healthy, that's healthy, you should be more healthy, but no one really defines what that is. And that's, I think, when we need to work with everybody individualized to find out, what that is for everyone. Who else would like to add to specific?
Yeah, so I was thinking too, I mean, in my role as a prevention educator, I'm obviously I'm working with broad ranges of students because I'm pushing into classrooms and really giving, tier 1 support to a lot of kids on topics of mental health and social emotional learning. And one thing that I found that's been relatively easy to do that I think a lot of schools can implement is, so I use this program called Too Good for Violence that I do in our elementary school, and it's just, it's an SEL curriculum. But when we're talking about something like anger management in there, they have their own examples, but a lot of times I'll just weave in examples that I know that are relevant. That like who's ever thrown a controller, who's ever thrown their phone because they got really upset. And some kids are shy and they say, look, I've done it before, and then a few more hands kind of go up. And so I think trying to find ways to even do that at the broad scale, at the tier 1 level with students, and bring in some of the healthy behaviors or mindfulness or their mental health in relation to their digital wellness and gaming and social media. You can do that within your existing SEL curriculum. I think it takes a little bit of creativity and things like that, but without, even if you don't have a full just digital wellness curriculum, I think it's something that can benefit all students, at least just mentioning it as part of topics, because I think separating them too much as like, well, this is the digital and this is the mental health, but I think a lot of our existing things that we do with mental health can just kind of apply on top of like the digital world.
Thank you, Chris. I know Dr. Jensen really wants to get in on this discussion because he's done some research on this. So what are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, I really like what the other panelists said, and particularly Dr. Austin about empowering kids, and what Chris Jensen just laid out in a very eloquent way was, in my mind, kind of like embedded SEL. There are a lot of great SEL curriculums, and there's a lot of schools that do this really well. But there's also a lot of schools that SEL is very much a one-off phenomenon. And what I mean by that, to be clear, is hiring a speaker in the gym for an assembly or showing a YouTube in the middle of English class. That doesn't really fit with the moment of instruction, and a lot of kids devalue that lesson at that point. So when you were talking about, and Chris, if I don't do this justice, I apologize, but the relevant experience of, well, who's ever thrown a controller or yelled at their TV or whatever, now you have a relevant topic that kids, particularly a niche of kids, but many kids are going to be interested in. And now you have this engaging, natural, authentic discussion as opposed to forcing, prefab questions after a video. Kids are going to respond to these teachable moments and so much better. And one of the things I find really interesting about esports is as schools and outside entities and corporations are racing to create curriculum and such, and make it a scholastic experience, that's great. But what's interesting is there's no real precedent. If we all wanted to embed something in math, first of all, every state would do it differently. And there's decades of precedent on that you'd have to work with. And often in schools, the biggest thing we experience is pushback. And what's the number one pushback? Well, we usually do it this way, or we've always done it this way. And because there is not a lot of we've always done it this way in esports, I think schools ought to look at this as an opportunity for real, authentic SEL that kids would respond to, because it's a topic they like to talk about. And all of a sudden you can be leveraging your class content for social emotional learning and mental health moments and things along those lines that would be a lot more effective. Why is that relevant? Schools are in the biggest mental health crisis they've ever faced. And if you're just going to walk into next year and the year thereafter and do what you've been doing for 20 years, honestly, that's not the solution. Looking for novel ways. And I'm not saying esports is going to fix the mental health crisis. It's only one new thing schools can do, but it could be a good thing.
Thank you. So let's talk a little bit about something we mentioned in the very beginning, was long-term sustainability and quality of life. Some people game for enjoyment, some to make friends for the social emotional aspects. Some people are very competitive, but long-term, what's the sustainability and quality of life for someone if they're going to be continuing to do esports?
Well, when I had the opportunity to speak with our esport athletes about quality of life, I think quality of life, I know the definition, we all know the definition, something that's personal and that's meaningful to a person long-term, and it's going to bring them long-term health and success. I like to call it meaningful success. But the esport athletes that I spoke to here at New York Tech, here's some of their comments, because I thought I could put it in their words. And when I asked them about quality of life, they mentioned that esports is something that they enjoy. It positively impacts their own quality of life. It got them through college. When they weren't able to play traditional sports even, esports was the saving grace for them. So it pretty much helped them to manage their stress long-term and get through the college experience. So I think that is very important. And then also they talked a lot about the experience of esports long-term leading into careers that were innovative, non-traditional, and that they could actually include some aspects of esports. So things like management, administration, marketing, engineering, even mental health and nutrition was mentioned as well, because that was something that was high on the list for these esport athletes. And so I got the sense from the esport athletes that although their majors were traditional, architecture, computer science, well, that overlaps a little bit, they did have interests both within esports and outside of esports, and looked at it as an opportunity to join the two together and come up with new and innovative ways to continue their passion for esports throughout the college or high school careers, and then later on into life.
Well, thank you for allowing their voice to be heard today on our panel. In hindsight, we might have wanted to ask some students, or some athletes, so lesson learned. Anyone want to add to what Dr. Austin shared? No? Well, last time when we had our esports panel on curriculum, Hillary had spoke about the digital flourishing wheel. And I thought that was a interesting concept. So I don't know if Hillary, if you want to spend a minute and tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, if I can unmute. Sure, I would be happy to. So I know I'm not actually sharing my screen, but I am going to pull it up just so I could see it because there's an awful lot of stuff in there. But if you want to look it up, you can go to the Digital Wellness Institute website. They do have, it's also Digital Wellness Collective. I'm not sure which one it's under, but it's really a holistic approach to sort of how we can live in this digital world and have this balance and this optimum state of health and sort of, manage any negative aspects and instead have a mindful approach to how we use technology in all aspects of our lives. So they break it up into, it's a really nice wheel, it's a nice graphic, and they break it up into 8 different segments, and everything, like these infographics do, everything has more pieces to it. But very simply, it's sort of living in this world where your productivity, your environment, your communication, and your relationships, as well as mental health, physical health, digital citizenship, and quantified self all sort of work together and play on each other for this overall optimum digital flourishing or digital fulfillment. And quantified self is more like, like wearables and things like that. Like, I mean, I know how many steps I've taken today, and I know how many steps my dog has taken today. So, when we and that's actually true. But, when we actually think about sort of how we're in all aspects of our lives communicating with this technology, and mind, body, spirit, as Patty had said, it can really help us achieve a lot of our goals, especially with this data and information that we get. But we also want to make sure that we're in the driver's seat and that we're using it in a way that benefits us. That sort of sums it up. But it's a great course, and honestly, it's a really nice graphic if you want to take a look at it.
Thank you, Hillary, for sharing. Anybody have any other resources? Because like you said, esports is new. We can look at some of the traditional models, but I think parents, especially, I think as a parent myself, I have a 17-year-old. It's hard for me to navigate, what is too much screen time between schoolwork on the screen, the social media, the watching the TikTok videos, and so forth. So I think people are looking for models such as this, or, how-to guides, or, one-page fact sheets. Anybody have any other resources or suggestions?
I would toss out, it's pretty broad-based, but the American Academy of Pediatrics, if you Google the name of their institution, followed by screen time recommendations, I'm not saying that they're right about everything, but they have a very well-founded, researched approach to the guidelines they recommend. They also, take a very nice approach in that every family is different, and, consider these things, and how do you want to implement certain guidelines in your home, and what's the best way that your kid responds to guideline and direction. And so I really thought they have a very thoughtful, intelligent approach if people want to seek that out. But one thing that I think Hillary did a nice job highlighting is screen time is a massive phrase that kind of covers so much. And it's interesting because I had a colleague of mine that was shocked that I was interested in the idea of supporting esports to help kids find a new niche in school, yet at the same time was delivering presentations talking about the perils of social media. But how amazingly different they are. From a scientific fact basis, we know from the American Academy of Pediatrics that almost 1 in 3 kids before they graduate meet an anxiety disorder criteria at some point in their school career. We know from the CDC that depression and hopelessness is up 40% from 2009, right? We have all these metrics that show that kids are in a bad spot. But then you look at some of these kids and you look at their potential vulnerabilities, and certainly, social media and comparison and judging yourself by likes and retweets and shares might be a contributing factor, or probably is a contributing factor as folks look into that more definitively. But then on the other side of the coin, let me deviate from science and just anecdotally say, in a moderate sized high school, I was asked to go down to the esports club, and so they could beat up on some teachers in Mario Kart. And I looked like a good person to beat badly at a video game, and they were correct. So I meander down there, and there were a lot of kids who were great kids, outstanding students, but quiet in class, maybe had no other extracurricular options. And all of a sudden they were alive and they were joking and they had found their friends and they were in their niche. And they weren't sitting in a dark room playing video games. They were being kids. They were being something that I couldn't draw out of them in my science class. And so I think screen time and technology is like many other things. And I'm curious what our panelists feel, where there is good side and there are bad sides. And that's undeniable. And you look at some of the pitfalls that our kids are experiencing with social media in particular, not to beat a dead horse, but it's an easy one. There are some real downsides to tech. And I think that we got to be careful to not lump everything together and make generalizations, but investigate aspects of technology individually and ask the same questions. What's the risk? What's the benefits? What are you sacrificing? What are you gaining? How does this impact the rest of your life? And are you doing it in moderation? And so that's a long-winded answer. I apologize, but I think going full circle, the AAP does a very nice job giving some information and looking at things from a holistic approach in what I thought personally as a parent was a non-judgmental fashion, but just points to consider as a parent.
If I could just jump onto that too, thank you. That was awesome, Chris. One of the parent resources that I really like, and I can post it into the chat, is just gamerwellness.org. And we have a lot, like there's the NASIF gamers graphic, which is really nice too. And I can throw a couple of these up or email them, and then they can be sent out. But Gamer Wellness has a really nice gamer assessment too, to sort of just kind of gauge in terms of how much, what your usage is and whether or not you are being a healthy gamer. But it's not just like a website. It was developed by Dr. Bobo Blankson, who is he is a pediatrician. And he specializes in adolescent medicine, and he's a gamer. And he's also, I think, the husband of the founder of the Digital Wellness Institute. So it's all very connected. And she is an author as well about happiness, I believe. And then also another doctor as well. And it's a really nice site. And the reason that I bring it up and sort of wanted to jump off of what Chris was saying was because when I looked at this, they actually have something that for me was really meaningful, which was this Fortnite guide. And as a parent, when the pandemic was going on and the schools were closed, I had a real bitter pill to swallow when it came to my son playing Fortnite. He was only 8 at the time. He's 10 now. And I mean, you can make your judgment about whether or not it was appropriate, and that's hard. But what I will say is that those social connections that he made were such a lifesaver in such a difficult time. And they were social connections with like close friends. They weren't like strangers out in the world. And being able to go to this website and reading what he was getting, what gamers are getting from gaming, what some of the, and I apologize, this is when technology just hates me. My Roomba is going around my house while I'm trying to talk to you. So my greatest apologies, I forgot to turn it off. I think it's done. But being able to see, what the benefits are, they actually break it down for parents. Like, here's what you need to understand. Here is, it literally says what we need to understand. Like, think about who your kids are playing with, what's their sphere of influence, what are some of the benefits of the game, what are some of the things that kids are getting from it, like maybe that sense of accomplishment that they're getting, that little dopamine hit that they're getting when they have a sense of achievement in the game, and what are some of those pitfalls, those sort of more addictive factors, like, I was so close to winning, it's one button, and then I can start again, and so that's like this cycle that starts to happen. But just being able as a parent to kind of sit back and read about, gaming and kind of getting a sense of what our kids are getting from it, and understanding that there is good and bad, like the other panelists said. Just two more quick things about that is, for me as a parent and in some of the other research that I've done, I have found that learning, as painful as it may be, learning about the game, understanding the game, sitting, watching the game, knowing who your kids are playing with, hopefully, connections that they actually have in life, and not just strangers online. And having those acceptable conversations, like not, judgmental and criticizing, but really trying to understand and be optimistic about what they're getting from the game, but also, help them set some of their own boundaries and some of their own regulation. And then one other thing that I have found to be really helpful is those natural boundaries. Like when my son is actually involved in other things like sports, like clubs, that naturally limits some of the game time that he does have. And I am also happy to say that our Fortnite phase has passed, and now we do a lot of basketball. And now, no judgment on Fortnite, but I do prefer the basketball. That's just a personal thing.
Thank you, Hillary. Such good reflection, through your own lens, which is nice, because it is hard if you don't know. And sometimes we don't have the capacity to learn everything there is to learn about what our kids are learning, what they're doing, and trying to monitor it and take care of ourselves and our husbands, our wives, our significant others, and everything else we have to do. So thank you for sharing that. Who wants to add on to what Hillary said? Some thoughts?
Yeah, I think I'll just add in kind of briefly one of the things that Hillary said about being able to talk to your kid about it. And this is something that I had ended up sending out to parents in our district and creating with just on that topic of like having the conversation, because I think it's daunting because it's, well, I don't know anything about it, so I'm a little scared to go into this conversation. And at that point, you're already, I don't want to say already lost, but like you've set yourself back a little bit. So like trying to frame it as, well, if your kid had gone to the playground and came back and said like, oh, I met a new friend, like, well, what are the questions that you would ask? Like, oh, who are they? How old are they? What school do they go to? Like, those kinds of questions. And, one thing that I know parents are obviously always very worried about is that like safety and who are they playing with? And, what are they saying? And I think that's a good way to have a non-judgmental conversation of like all those normal questions that you would ask in any other setting of, oh, who are you playing with today? Is that someone that you know from school, or is this someone you know online? And you can kind of start the conversation that way. That doesn't sound like you're grilling them. It doesn't sound like, an interrogation. And instead, you're just learning the way you would if your kid came home and said they made a new friend in class today. So I think it's the fear is, I don't understand this, and so I'm scared of like, what questions do I ask? And I think a lot of, as all the panelists have said, a lot of our existing ideas and frameworks we can sort of just adapt and maybe be able to have that conversation, even if we're not totally comfortable.
I will interrupt for a minute and say that a lot of people are putting in different resources into the chat. You can save the chat and then you can have all those resources. And our one friend, Scott, who doesn't tell us where he's from, has been adding a lot of good thoughts and wonderings into the chat, talking about coaches, etc. So Scott, thank you for participating in our panel. We appreciate it. So we have about 7 minutes left. I wanted to ask if anybody had any questions who attended today, and thank you for everyone who attended. And then I'll ask the panelists to just sum up wellness and esports in 1 or 2 sentences. But let's see if we have any additional questions. Put them in the chat or put them in the Q&A. And Kelly is sharing that the committee will follow up with an email containing the resources, also where you can find the recorded link of this. Yes, that is my supervisor, Heather. We will be sharing the resources. Kelly will send them out to everybody who registered on Frontline. And you can also save the chat. And Heather, I saved it, so you can have it. All right, give it another minute for see if we have any questions. All right, so why don't we just go around? Thank you so much to our panel. Great discussion we had. Great things that I'm wondering about that I did do. And now my son's going off to college. How can I support him then when I'm not right there with him? So, and how I can support schools. So, Dr. Melanie Austin, why don't you begin with telling us one or two sentence words of wisdoms or summary for today's panel.
Okay, so I think in summary, I agree with all the panelists. I would say, definitely to parents, really be supportive and help, your student athlete get through their times in school. And then I also wanted to say to the educators and health professionals that really looking at an integrated model, such as the model developed by Drs. Weibel and Dr. Donahue at the New York Tech Center for Esports Medicine, which really pulls together nutritionists, occupational therapists, physical therapists, the educators, behavioral health, and wellness. So really looking at, encouraging parents and coaches to come to us, as with the traditional athletes, where we would just see the sports medicine doctor, maybe seeing a team of health professionals and educators and counselors. I think that would be helpful. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Austin. Who would like to go next?
I can go next. Thank you so much for having me. This was a great discussion and I had a lot of fun. I did say at the beginning that I would mention curriculum and it's not the end all be all. I mean, I'm sure that there's other curriculums out there, but if you are an educator or you're starting an esports program or you're a coach, some of the excellent resources that are out there that I had mentioned last time are certainly the NASEF curriculum, and I did put the NASEF Gamers PDF in the chat. They talk about relationships, they talk about choices and spaces, ergonomically, and what your surroundings look like, feelings, what your future is, careers, which we were talking about. It's a great free resource. You can go to the NASEF website. And there's also a couple other ones you can take a look at, the HSEL Mental Health Moments, which is paid, but they do have a really nice preview. And Garden State Esports, if you're trying to start an esports program, they have a ton of stuff and it's all free, and you just take it and look at it. They're wonderful, and they have an excellent curriculum that they developed. It's called EPIC, and you just have to fill out a form, EPPIC, and they will send it to you. So there's a lot of resources out there, and you can always contact us at NARIC as well, and we'd be happy to point you in the right direction.
Thank you, Hillary.
I would just say that I appreciate the opportunity to be with all of you and took to heart the panelists' comments. This is a fascinating and fast-moving, field that's developing in schools, and I think it's one of those things where it's good to see dedicated folks that are really bright and invested in what's best for students to be leading it, because that to me as a parent makes me feel better about the process. And I think esports does provide a niche for a lot of kids. And I think if you believe in the value of extracurriculars in band, traditional sports, theater, you need to believe in the same value for attaching your kid to a cohort of friends and forming relationships. That to me is an exciting opportunity, particularly in the midst of a massive mental health crisis that we get bludgeoned with statistics every day that are frightening, and schools need to consider every way possible to have kids engaged in school and forming friendships. And if this is another one, then by all means, add it to the list.
Thank you very much. Chris Jensen.
Yeah, I guess what I'd say, mainly to schools and districts, people in schools, like my advice is jump in. It's definitely, it's a little scary, it's daunting, it's I'm not sure, but what I found, and just coming into a very unique role that I really wasn't sure what to expect in my school, and just kind of went for it, and whether or not it's we're implementing a whole new big curriculum or anything like that, or like I mentioned, weaving things into your existing SEL lessons, things that you're bringing to your students, you can kind of start now and start small and have those conversations with the stakeholders, with students, with parents, administrators, teachers, counselors, whoever, to think, well, where do we grow from here? But I find myself worrying about this, and maybe you do too. If it's not going to be perfect, then I don't know if I'm going to start small and just go for it and build from there. And you know, I think, like all the panelists said, it's super exciting. I think once you get into it too, you'll find that it's hard to keep out of your head once you really get into it.
Well, I can't thank you all enough for being on the panel today. Don't forget that in 2 weeks, we have another panel, our last panel on inclusion. But don't worry, next year, we're already thinking about how we can support all of you going forward. But thank you to Dr. Melanie Austin, to Hillary D., Dr. Chris Jensen, and Chris Johnson, and the committee, and all of you for attending today's panel discussion. I hope you walked away with something that you could use going forward. Have a happy, healthy day.
Thank you.